The Seattle Kraken, the NHL's newest team, are reaching the end of the 2021 part of their first season in the league. Erica Ayala of Locked On Kraken joins us to talk about the Kraken, where they're at roughly the midpoint of their season, and how things are going in the newest team in the league. All that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast.
Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, glad to be with you here. Hope everyone had a great holiday weekend, and thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the Monday show the host of Locked On Kraken and Locked On Women's Basketball, Erica Ayala. Erica, thank you so much for joining us. How was your holiday?
Gil, always a pleasure to join you. My holiday was nice and relaxing, just the way I liked it. We have a family tradition of doing Christmas Eve all together, or virtually, I guess, these days, and then movie day on the big day on Christmas. So that was fun to do. A little bit of a remote situation for me this time around, but all in all, very good. Thanks for asking.
Oh, thanks for being here and for talking a little Kraken. You know, it's always tricky when a team is in its first season in a league, an expansion team. You never quite know what to expect. And in some ways, this season for the Kraken so far has been different than what we expected. When we talked before the season started, we said this team would be solid defensively, but may struggle to score goals. And yet it's kind of been the flip side of that a little bit. Why don't you talk about where this team stands as we head to the end of 2021?
Sure thing. So to your point, Gil, we were talking a lot about what Ron Francis was talking about, building from the back, talking about goaltending and defensemen. And we'll start with the defensemen, looking at the size and build of the decor. You expected a certain type of game from the Seattle Kraken. That being said, on paper and on the ice has been a little bit different, where I think defensively the Seattle Kraken have struggled. And, you look at some of the advanced stats and it's a little bit, it kind of, toggles with my mind a little, but you'll see the advanced stats where the Seattle Kraken are actually solid defensively until they're not, is what the data says, which I mean is what my eye test says as well. But there are defensive breakdowns that happen way too often with the Seattle Kraken. I actually don't think that the Seattle Kraken have been able to implement and utilize their size because they're not pushing people out in front of their netminders, which is something that I was hoping that with a big, tough defense, again, on paper, that they'd be able to do. Now, granted, because of COVID, which unfortunately everyone in the league is still dealing with because of injury, off-season surgeries and the like, the Seattle Kraken, their roster has been compromised. But again, that's something that every team, every year, in every professional sports league is going to have to deal with. And yet, the defensive side of things has not been to my particular liking. I know Locked On Kraken fans know I am a stickler for defense. So maybe we could put that to the side as just something that burns my grits. But if that were the only thing, though, as I mentioned, General Manager Ron Francis talked about building this team from the back. So then you look at goaltending, and you've got Philip Grubauer and Chris Driedger both signed in free agency. So none of the goaltenders, except for Joey Daccord, who is, in with the Charlotte Checkers for the most part. None really of our goaltenders, and we didn't really pick too many, but, from the expansion draft ended up with the Seattle Kraken. We went through free agency, Philip Grubauer, on a 6-year contract, but he's been struggling The best way I can say it, Gil, is that he seems a little out of sorts. He seems uncomfortable. It's not been disclosed that he's dealing with any injury. He had a little bit of a tweak about a week ago that kept him off the ice for one game, and then he was back at practice after getting that rest. Not sure if maybe he's just not gelling correctly, but there is a manifestation of whatever discomfort Gruby is having is coming onto the ice. Sometimes he seems a little absent. Sometimes he just seems disconnected in a manner of speaking. I don't think he's necessarily a big communicator on the ice, but that to me, for this particular Kraken team and how they're playing, that is something that Philip Grubauer might have to reconsider when playing, at least for right now, with this Seattle Kraken team. And that's a tough thing, right? You bring in a guy in free agency, you want him to play his game. But his game for this team right now isn't really working. And I don't think it's all on Grubauer. I mentioned the defense needs to tighten up. But at some point, there has to be a little bit of a give and go. And I just don't think that Philip Grubauer has figured that out. Whereas Chris Driedger, when he can stay healthy, has figured it out a little bit more. I think he's bought into the Seattle Kraken style of hockey and where he fits into that style of hockey. So in the back, we've got some things to work out. On the front end, though, you look at Jaden Schwartz, Jordan Eberle for sure. Unfortunately, Yanni Gord he at least on the other end of the break was still in COVID protocol. Brandon Tanev now suffering an injury, but those are some of the players. Even Ryan Donato, who I love talking about. These are some players that are either at or are on pace to score their productivity from last season. And so that's very good for Seattle. But that they have to work so hard that they can score 4 or 5 goals in a game and that not be enough, that's something that they got to work on.
Do you think with Grubauer, do you think that it's a confidence thing? Maybe he has a lack of confidence in the players in front of him?
That could be it. Again, the defense early on especially has not been great. I think it's gotten better. I think the Seattle Kraken is starting to play more of a team defense. So it could be frustration. I think that's absolutely a part of it. But, as the starting goaltender or the presumptive starting goaltender, especially again with Driedger sometimes not 100% healthy, Grubauer has to figure that out. Defensive breakdowns are going to happen when you play at an elite level, and the NHL is an elite level. Now, am I talking like blown tire every 5th pass? No, broken sticks. Those are unfortunate things that happen. Some of these are small little things, exits, entries that are botched that other teams are taking advantage of. And so if you have a defense that's not necessarily sharp and a netminder that is having difficulty kind of fitting in, it just is a little bit of a mess. And it's hard to say on any given night, who's to quote unquote blame, which is why you hear a lot of the guys saying it's on all of us. And I think that's the right approach. So no, this is not on Philip Grubauer alone. That being said, heavy is the head. And in hockey, the goaltender is like the pitcher, right? Everything seems to go through them, whether it's warranted or not. That's how we see the game. And so Philip Grubauer is going to have to figure out how to adjust.
Give me some reasons for optimism. What do Kraken fans have to look forward to now that we're hopefully soon coming back from this COVID extended holiday break?
Well, the good thing is that, again, if Chris Driedger can stay healthy, I think we will start to see, or I would, if I were Ron Francis, I would definitely start to deploy that, tandem, that proper 50-50 goalie tandem that they had talked about. Chris Driedger didn't have a great preseason. I wasn't very impressed. I don't think he was very impressed with what he did, but Driedger has played some massive games, that stretch where the Seattle Kraken played Carolina. They played the Capitals. They played his Florida Panthers. Drieger was holding it down for Seattle. So I like that. Another thing that I've mentioned, although I have not been impressed on the whole defensively, is that when this team really buys in and they go all in, sacrificing the body, blocks in front, clearing the dangerous, areas in front of Gruby or Driegs, that's when they play their best. They have the capability, it's there. Now it's just the consistency. Some of that, unfortunately, is out of their control. I alluded to it, but we're going to have some of those high performance players in COVID protocol on the other end of the holiday break. So, but what I will say is areas for optimism is that some of these young guys, Vince Dunn, Morgan Geeky, Ryan Donato, they're showing that when they're given an opportunity, they're taking it. And that's exactly what I see long term for the Seattle Kraken team. They needed some veterans to anchor this team, if you will. I would like to see Dave Haxtell give a little bit more leeway and a little bit more ice time for some of those young guys who have already proven, when they get in the game that they can get it done. That's Ryan Donato for me. That's McCann for me, Jared McCann for me. That's Vince Dunn for me. Let those guys play because you're going to need them in the next handful of years.
No question about that. Erica, you got a milestone episode coming up. Why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers where they could find the show, where they could find you on social media?
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks so much, Gil, for having us. And yes, on Monday's show, so that's today, we have our 100th episode, and we're going to be joined by the voice Fitz, the radio voice of the Seattle Kraken, the first broadcaster that was hired by, at the time, NHL Seattle. And he's going to talk about his experience with the Seattle Kraken and the way that they are just doing things differently on and off the ice and how invigorating that is for him. Of course, he's going to talk about how he got into hockey and how he fell in love with hockey. And although he's a Detroit native, it was actually a Pacific Division rival, the Edmonton Oilers, that got him into the game. So that and more on our 100th episode.
And where can they find you on social media?
Oh, yes, of course. You can find us at Locked on Kraken, all one word, no hyphens or underscores or anything like that. Locked on Kraken. That's across all social media and on YouTube.
All right. Eric Ayala, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Looking forward to our next visit.
Thank you, Gil, and Happy New Year to you.
Thanks. Happy and healthy to you as well.